Hi, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Sara Hume. I'm the curator here at the Kent State University Museum, and we are opening our latest exhibition, Dancing with the Distance, which showcases the work of Janice Lessman-Moss. And we're very happy to have with us this evening Janice, who's going to answer some questions and talk to me for a little bit. So Janice, thank you so much for joining us. Just to sort of get started, could you tell us a little bit about how you got started weaving?
Sure, Sarah, so it's nice to be here with you, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this beautiful museum exhibition series, and I'm delighted that you invited me. Talk about where I got started with my weaving. It happened a long time ago. I took a class kind of just out of curiosity at Tyler School of Art, which is part of Temple University in Philadelphia. And I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had never really thought about textiles as an artistic medium. And I took the course, and actually I really didn't like it right off the bat. But by the end of the semester, I was sold. And I really got involved with the kind of the physicality of the processes. I really liked the metaphors inherent to making textiles or to working with fibrous materials. Initially, I wasn't weaving. I was kind of working with some wrapping techniques, but everything in textiles is very cumulative and it's very transformative. So you're taking something and you're modifying it through repetition and accumulation. That sense of time, that notion, the metaphor of evolution, all that stuff is really present in the processes, which then inform the work, inform the making of the work, and the meaning once it's done. So it really wasn't until I came to Kent State that I started to really immerse myself in weaving per se.
So could you just give us a little bit of an overview about your career here at Kent State?
I'd be happy to. It's been a wonderful 40 years, believe it or not. I'm celebrating the end of my 40th year of teaching at Kent State, and it has been an incredible journey. I have worked with so many wonderful students, and they are the ones that have really prompted me to move forward with my work, because they need to be aware of what is going on in the world of technology. I feel beholden to my students to keep them current, and so it always meant that I had to kind of move forward with my own work to make sure that they were aware of new technologies, new ways of thinking about techniques. So when I came to Kent State, as I mentioned, I really had a very preliminary kind of knowledge of weaving. I had studied it and I loved it, but I wasn't really well versed. Of course, you're young when you arrive as a new assistant professor. So I really immersed myself in the techniques and grew as an artist and as an educator kind of simultaneously. In 2001 was really a very transformative time for me, because we were fortunate enough to be able to purchase a single thread control loom, which is manufactured by the Tronrud company in Norway. And at that time, we were really on one of the only universities in the United States, if not in the world, that really had one of these looms. They were expensive, and also they were brand new. So we were able to purchase one, and I was so excited to have one, but of course I didn't know how to use it. And it is a jacquard technology, single thread control. So I had to immerse myself in learning how to use jacquard technology. Fortunately, the stars aligned that year, and the Jacquard Center, which it's a kind of a teaching and also practice center in North Carolina. It opened that year, 2001, and I was one of the charter group of students, participants in the workshops that went on there, and they were teaching how to work with Jacquard technology. So I went down and I studied very hard, and as soon as I was done learning how to use it, the loom arrived, had to get it put together, and then I had the great honor of weaving the first piece, which is actually going to be in my show here. I thought it was really important to kind of, as a landmark, that's piece number 280, and it's in the other room. But that was a very seminal piece for me because it opened up new ways of thinking about pattern and repeat, and kind of launched me into doing the work that I am doing now.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the progression of your work, and maybe, I know that we had an exhibition of your work, I think it was 2004.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the way you see your work has progressing in the meantime.
Yeah. The exhibition that I had here in 2004 was actually, a lot of the pieces in that exhibition were done on a digital Dobby loom. So the patterns of necessity function very differently, because when you're working with a digital Dobby, your threads are not single controlled. They are controlled in teams on shafts. And although there was a digital component to that, it still required that I think a lot more kind of mathematically, a lot of kind of numbers and measuring. And there were things that I couldn't do that I kind of wanted to do. I knew in my mind, I had this idea, I want this to happen. So how do I make it happen with the parameters of my current tools? So I did a lot more kind of painting patterns on the warp. And then that created kind of an organic field. And then that was responded to by the more mechanical patterns that are created through the mechanism of the shafts lifting in those teams that I mentioned. There were a couple of jacquard pieces in that exhibition as well, and they were, really my newest, my earliest forays into that technique. So I really liked them, of course, but I feel like my work has really matured as, I have been able to focus more on these kind of large gestural movements, more linear kind of patterns, and materiality, because I'm now inserting some metal wire into the textiles. And it gives me so much more flexibility. I look at these pieces, though, being a little bit more graphically based rather than mathematically based, although math is still a very important component of it. Everything is kind of measured, and the relationships of the sizes of the patterns are really very well considered in terms of numbers. But I have a flexibility to kind of just make movements that can be large, that can be small, and they create this kind of macro-micro relationship in the field.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's interesting when you talk about sort of the grand gestures that you have. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the scale of your work, because a lot of the pieces that we see are quite large, but then you also have series that are smaller.
Yeah.
I wonder how you sort of see the relationship between those works.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I love both types of weavings. I like the small pieces because of the intimacy of the creation, the process, the making. All of my pieces began as digital designs on the computer, and I work with Photoshop, so they are generated in a very similar way. But once I'm done designing, then of course that blueprint that I'm creating, the design on the computer, is fed to the loom, and the loom then starts to understand what threads need to be raised on the loom, the warp threads, and to create the patterns or the image or whatever I created in the virtual world with the computer. So when I'm designing, I do have to think in terms of scale, but it's really not until I start making that I really get excited about this very intimate relationship in the small pieces. And I can, it's right my body size, and I can work just right in front of me and really focus on what is going on in this very kind of limited space. And there's something very fulfilling about that. Mm-hmm. The relationships of materials are very different. I used waxed linen a lot in the smaller pieces. It's prohibitively expensive in the larger pieces, mm-hmm. and I don't know that it would actually do the same kind of thing, because you really want to get in there and see these kind of things close up. So the waxed linen and the wires close up are really very exciting textural variations, and so I'm experiencing that on the loom. Contrast that with the bigger pieces. They're much more physical, and I like that too. because I'm kind of moving with the making. I have to throw my shuttle, and I'm walking kind of back and forth in front of the loom. And then I am also inserting some of the pieces or some of the parts of the threads in smaller sections. So it's both kind of grand and then also a little bit more intimate. But I really enjoy that kind of activity of making. And it's, despite the fact that it's a very kind of slow process, cumulative, the chip away kind of mentality. I always tell my students, you have to think about doing a little bit at a time because you're never going to get through the whole thing at one time. It's just too labor intensive, too time consuming. But it does evolve if you just have patience, and that allows you to really focus on what is happening at the moment. So you're not kind of projecting what's going to happen, you're really enjoying seeing it evolve just row by row.
So I think probably a lot of people are wondering how long it takes you to make one of your weavings.
That's always a good question. And I appreciate the fact that people are kind of aware that they do involve a lot of labor. Labor sometimes connotes something that you really don't want to do, and I love doing it all. But it does involve a lot of process, a lot of technique, a lot of thinking, a lot of planning. So I would say that there are different stages of the making of the work. One is, of course, the planning stage, so that I am working on my digital designs on the computer. And of course, there's a quality of expediency to that. It moves fairly quickly, although decision making is always time consuming. So I'm working on developing my designs, and usually simultaneously I'm also engaged in the dyeing of the warp and or the weft, because I'm starting to see relationships evolve in the designs that suggest this would be a good color weft. A lot of times I put a long warp on the loom at one time. I'll put multiple colors on the loom so that I can respond to them as I decide I want to. So in other words, I decide I'm going to do 3 large pieces, and I wind my entire warp, and then I lay it out in my studio and I paint sections of it, thinking that, the first piece I'm going to make blue, and the second piece I'm going to make is green, and the third piece I'm going to make is red. And at that point, I have no idea what I'm going to be doing with it ultimately. But I like color, and it gives me something to kind of work towards. So then I put that on the loom, and I have my first blue section. And so I have to start thinking, okay, what does that kind of demand in terms of my thinking about space or gesture or, overall kind of compositional mood. And so I start to respond to that and think about the colors in the weft and how that will help the dynamics to be more, to actualize the dynamics that I'm looking for. So if I want a real, energized piece, I will think about making a high contrast weft. If I want something that's a little bit more kind of mellow, I'll think about a different kind of color in the weft. So here we are moving along. That's weeks of work already that we've done, and I haven't even finished my design yet and started to weave. Once I have a lot of those, the coloration decisions, and I've gotten all the dyeing done, then it's time for me to start weaving. I do work as an educator. I am a professor of art, and so I'm at school virtually every day. I usually have Mondays as kind of a studio day, which I try and protect that time. But that's not to say I am not on call, and that I'm always available for my students. I want to always be available for my students or for any kind of thing that happens at school because it's important. I love it and I want to do it. But the idea is that then weaving time is pretty much evenings. And so, after a long day of teaching, I go home and I have a nice dinner with my husband, and then I go into the studio. And I work usually for between 2 and 4 hours, depending on how hard my day was. And so it means that I'm going to be kind of involved in the process for a greater length of time. I may have to weave, usually it's a month. And I don't mind that. I mean, again, there's something very satisfying about enjoying the morsels. And I liken it to my interest in walking. I'm happy to kind of just chip away and move slowly through the world. And I enjoy walking every day. So I, take an hour and I go for a long walk, or I'm walking back and forth to school every day. And so I feel like it's almost like another walk at night. I take a 2-hour, 4-hour walk at my loom, and I get to just focus on what I'm doing. It's exciting to, it's a journey, and so I kind of mark it off on my drawing, which is sitting on the loom, and I'll say, boy, look at how much progress I'm making, where I am in my journey of my weaving, and that is something to kind of look forward to as well. So, you kind of work with what you have, and that suits me. It's been fine for me to work that way for all these years. I enjoy it. And it's actually also, weaving is very physical work, and especially on the large loom. So I feel, in some ways it's a blessing that I can't, do 8 hours of weaving every day. I would probably just have a really horrible back. So I enjoy the idea of just, taking a little bit at a time and really being able to concentrate.
I mean, I really love when you talk about walking and the sort of the relationship between your walking and your weaving. And part of this I noticed as I go through and look at the titles of the pieces that you've selected, there seem to be a lot of outdoors aspects. There's stars and sun and then like winter, summer. Mm-hmm. So how do you see this sort of relationship between seasons and passage of time and with your work?
Yeah, that's again, it's so very much connected. And being an artist, it's not a job; it's a kind of a way of life. And being an educator, the same thing, because you're always interested in learning more, so that you can kind of pass that information along to your students. But because I really want to be attentive to my environment, and I am, because I'm out in it. And I look at things and I notice subtle changes in the world, which, you don't notice when you're driving because you're zipping by. But when you're walking, you're just kind of meandering. Sometimes, a lot of times I walk fast, but I do sometimes just kind of stroll or pay attention to all of the little subtleties, noticing the grass coming up, noticing the leaves coming out, or the leaves falling, the changing of the light. In Ohio, it's beautiful. And the skies are so incredibly diverse in terms of the colors of blue and little bits of red. So if I walk dusky, I'll see something different. In the summers, I tend to walk in the morning. So it's a very different kind of quality of light and shadow. Very aware of that. I walk on the streets, a lot of or on the sidewalks by the streets, and so I'm in the neighborhoods. I like that, and I like being around architecture and kind of that geometry and the kind of markings on the sidewalks, kind of that rhythm of the slabs of cement. But then I also walk on a path. We have a great hike and bike trail in Kent, and I walk on the path, so I'm always under these trees and surrounded by sounds and fragrances of nature. So I'm very much immersed in that environment, and it's very influential of my color. It's just, I kind of absorb it. I don't select it. It kind of is in me at that time. If it's winter, I feel a different way about color than I do in the summer. And I like that. So I'm kind of responding to things almost, intuitively. And I enjoy that aspect of, incorporating things that I love to do, my walking with my weaving.
So as people come and see the exhibition, I wonder if you could give a little bit of insight into how you thought about arranging the pieces and how they relate to each other in the space.
That was a real challenge because fortunate to have this opportunity to show such a large body of work, which doesn't usually happen. You're usually showing a focused body, something that was done within the last year, maybe last year and a half. So this is very cumulative. which presented some issues in some regards because although I'm working with a very similar vocabulary, I am working with the circle within the square. I've been working with that forever. I love the symbology, and also the beautiful kind of formal aspects of working with a circle, and that in relation to the grid of the warp and weft on the loom. So there is a imposed square just by the nature of the process. So it's the circle within the square. So you can see that in all of the work. And actually, Sarah, I have those drawings in the hallway too, which you had asked me to put in to give people a kind of a sense of how the work develops. So they'll get to see kind of the circles that I begin with, the template of circles that I begin with. So a lot of they're all based in the same kind of circles and squares, but some of them have smaller templates of circles, some of them have larger templates. So there's a kind of an energy that changes, some maybe a little bit more urgent or active, and others being a little bit more kind of lyrical, elegant. And that has to do a lot with just the size of the line and the movement and the multiple layers of lines. Coloration does affect it as well. And I think when I started to organize the exhibition, I thought about color relationships and those kind of shape relationships. So seeing kind of smaller pattern movements in pieces on this side, and then seeing maybe some larger pattern movements on the pieces on this wall. But it was a challenge, and I don't think that there's ever a way to make them, they're not meant to be, they're meant to be distinctive, so it is kind of hard to kind of put them all together, but hopefully the viewers will take an opportunity to just really focus in on one piece at a time, maybe kind of enjoy the scope of the room when they first walk in, and then kind of walk up and really kind of study each piece closely so they can enjoy the variety of colorations and textural differences.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's so amazing about your work is the sort of the way it functions differently depending on how far you are from it. And so proximity, you can appreciate different aspects of it.
Yes.
So you can see the weave structure when you're close up, but you see the overall linear pattern from a distance. And I think that gets to the title of the exhibition, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Because the dancing with the distance, I think, sort of talks a little bit about that interplay too.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm glad you pointed that out. I think, of course, that is one of the most amazing things about textiles is that kind of sense of detail, and yet, so you're viewing something from a distance, there's a different dynamic. And then the hope is, of course, that you're compelled to go close up and look at things and then really study it and understand what you just pointed out. The Dancing with the Distance is a title that I came upon. Initially I used it for the title of a series of works that is displayed in the hallway. And it is the title of a song that my husband wrote. My husband, Al Moss, is a musician in Northeast Ohio, and has done some really amazing songwriting, and he plays pedal steel guitar. His studio is right next to my studio. So when we're at home working, he's in there working on his music, and kind of the rhythms and repetitions and sounds coming out of his space, kind of resonate with me as I'm working with repetition and accumulation as well. If he has a band practicing, rehearsing at our house, there is also a kind of an emphasis on that kind of sense of melody and harmony and relationships of sound. So that's always kind of influenced the way I think about the relationships of the lines and the marks in the field. It's very musical. And actually, music leads to dancing. And I've oftentimes thought about dancing as well, and that kind of sense of choreography and that sense of relation between one human and another human if you're going out and dancing while your husband is playing. And so it seemed appropriate for me to use his song titles or some of his song lyrics, and a number of the pieces in the exhibition. I'm trying to think of any offhand aside from Dancing with the Distance, but they have been influenced by his songs as well. So he wrote a song in the starting at the beginning of 2020, and just when we were starting to have lockdown. And it seemed like at that time, the notion of dancing with the distance, kind of thinking ahead, what we didn't have at the current moment when we were in lockdown, and what we kind of longed for, and that reconnection with our fellow beings. And so thinking about moving forward and thinking in terms of the future. But I also think about that notion of distance as covering the where we are now, and that you are traveling a distance to get from point A to point B, beginning to end, and you are going to enjoy that journey. Mm-hmm. And so I liked all of the kind of associations with that notion of dancing with the distance, and I was happy to be able to use that to kind of create a little bit more character and distinction for the interpretation of the pieces, maybe. Mm-hmm.
So another thing that someone will notice when they come to this exhibition is the sort of the numbering system that you have. Oh. And I wonder if there's any sort of secret to that, because all of your pieces are identified by a number as well as a title in many cases.
Yeah, I started numbering things when I started forgetting titles of work, and that happened early on. And then it just kind of made sense, thinking about professional practices, always encouraging my students to be very organized about keeping track of their work and making sure that they respect their work. So I started to attach a number to a title. And I started that when I got to Kent State, but I did then retroactively start numbering my pieces, and it started with the first successful finished piece that I did when I was an undergraduate student in 1977. So that was number one. And I think the most recent ones in the exhibition, 491A and 491B. So gives you a sense of the amount of work that I have done over the past 40 some years. So, it's a lot of work, but I've also been at it for a long time. Mm-hmm. So it makes me feel very excited that I have been persistent and that I have been dedicated to moving forward with the work, but that really just helps me to keep track of things.
It helps us to keep track of them too. We appreciate that as well. You sort of disguise how many pieces, because like 484, whatever, there's 5 or 6 pieces that are A, B, C. So.
Yes. When there's smaller pieces, I do tend, if I'm working in a series, I have my Dancing with the Distance series, so there's like 10 pieces in that series. And then my Walking with My Shadow series, there's like 8 pieces in that series, just because my numbers would get way too high. And I always, they're part of the same, thought process. So if I am starting on a series, I'm sitting down and I'm creating one design, and I do think about how it leads maybe a little more smoothly from one to the other. My pieces always do that, of course. I mean, as an artist, you evolve, and you're always questioning one piece. What did I do in this piece that I really like? What did I do in this piece that I really like to change, or see develop more further? And so there always is that kind of sense of transition and evolution. But in doing a series, they tend to happen more quickly. And so I work with a design flowing into the next, into the next, into the next. They tend to have a stronger dialogue. So I feel like it's appropriate to just kind of keep them all one number and just give them letters. So 484A, 484B, so forth.
So I feel like in the past, we've talked about how long your career has been, but you've been very successful as an artist. And I wonder, we might have students and stuff who are watching this, and if you have sort of advice for them and how your success, obviously, you're very productive, but you're very good at getting your work out there. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the business of art, as we call it, of course, is always the most tedious. When I prioritize my life, I think about making my art, I think about teaching. Those are my primary goals. And trying to be a good person, of course, is at the top. But the idea of getting the work out, first of all, of course, you have to make it. And so I'm always adamant with my students about telling them, it's not going to happen unless you work at it. And no matter how much time you have in a day to devote to your work, you have to devote some little morsel. That doesn't mean you have to be necessarily in the studio, but you have to be doing some sketches, you have to be doing some research, you have to be kind of thinking about how things are going to move forward in your art. And for me, even on my walks, I oftentimes think about things and relationships and patterns, and I could consider that in when I'm developing my next design. So thinking all the time, but working, and you have to dedicate time to it. It's not going to happen otherwise. And honestly, it is cumulative, because if you try to take advantage of any kind of opportunity that comes your way to show wherever, not being, you want to be selective about where you're showing your work, but you want people to see it. Mm-hmm. So you get your work out wherever people invite you to show your work. And it's surprising how then once somebody sees it, no matter if it was at this art center in a very small town in Ohio, it may then be somebody who sees it who is working at a museum in Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. And so, you make connections that way. Or it's somebody who is a member of a local guild and they want you to come and talk to their group. So I think you just have to take advantage of every opportunity that comes your way and get the work done, and then get the work out as best you can. You start building a network. You develop a community through also supporting your colleagues, your friends, your peers. Being a member of the art community at Kent State University and at Kent and at Northeast Ohio and in Ohio, you have to go to openings, you have to look at shows, you have to be part of what's going on, so that you can meet people who are like-minded and maybe who can give you some advice, or maybe you can share stories with. And that's what makes life so rich and exciting.
So I know you teach your students weaving, but I feel like you teach your students a lot more than weaving. And I wonder how you see, what you teach as being sort of informative to their lives. And
Yeah, because I have a lot of students who come into the classes who are not majors. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of minors, many from the School of Fashion. And I love to expose people to thinking of textiles, anybody who walks through the door. If you're taking a class, if you're coming to visit the studio, I want to share what I know about the process and encourage you to kind of think differently about the way you look at things, and about the way you kind of just understand that things are not just a technique, they're not just a process, they're not just a thing, but they're kind of a way of thinking. That notion of weaving as connection, weaving as a web, as a unifier. So it has many, again, kind of metaphoric underpinnings, and I love that about textiles. So students who come into the classroom and they get excited about actually making the work, but they also, I hope, start to think about how these processes resonate in other aspects of their life, and just making them think a little bit differently or a little more sensitively, and move forward with the work they want to do with a little bit more of a base of understanding of how things kind of work together.
So this exhibition is really sort of in honor of your retirement, which is at the end of the year. I wonder if you have thoughts about where you're headed in the future, or what you're going to do once you are retired.
Well, I tend to actually not say what I'm doing in May as retiring. No, it's fine. But I tend to say that I'm graduating. My niece graduated from Kent State University last year. And as I was sitting there and listening to President Dyke and kind of talking to the students and bidding them farewell and launching them on their careers, I thought, that is me. I want that to be me. I don't want me to be leaving and going away and not, I'm going to still be a vital part of this community and of hopefully of the art world. I'm going to remain in Kent. I love Kent, and I have a great studio here, as you've seen. And I would like to remain close to the university so I can take advantages of all the things that are going on at the university with lectures and with exhibitions. And so I'm going to stay in town, and I really look at my future as being very much what it is now, with the absence of teaching. You know, I don't have to go to school, and I don't have to plan any curriculum. I don't have to go to school and meet with the students, which I will miss. I know I will miss that, because I have enjoyed that kind of camaraderie. I've learned so much from my students and have valued my time working with students, and have gained some really wonderful friends through students who have gone on to do exciting things after graduations. And since I've been here for 40 years, my students that I worked with when I first started are getting up there in years, so they're doing really good things. So I don't look at my life as changing much. I think that I'm hoping that I will be able to immerse myself more in my studio and have a little bit more downtime, because as you know, when you're at the university, it's doing this and doing that and trying to juggle how many balls, and I'm hoping that I won't have quite as many balls in the air, and I will be able to kind of just concentrate a little bit more on what I want to do, and also do a little more reading for pleasure rather than reading things to just, again, kind of move my students forward, and have them reading and me reading and us discussing reading. So it'll be more maybe me time in some regards. Maybe do a little bit of traveling, but we'll see how that goes. I love being in the studio, and I love being here. I don't feel that I need to travel to any exotic locales to really feel fulfilled. Nature is here in Ohio, and I just go out and immerse myself in it anytime I feel I need a shot of sunshine, or I need a shot of just kind of energy. I go outside and I just kind of walk and enjoy it.
Well, let me congratulate you on your upcoming graduation. That's very exciting and very well deserved. And we're just so excited to have your exhibition here, and I hope that all of our viewers are able to come and see it. And also, you are able to purchase the catalog that we have that has pictures of a lot of the pieces. It has essays by several people, and that is really enriching and will further enrich the exhibition. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah. It's been a real pleasure.